Yeah, mate, as I was just saying to you beforehand, in terms of Robin Koch and obviously being linked with the club, we talked about the adaptability before, but the call cut off. Are you just all right to go through that again in terms of how you think he'll fit into the Premier League with Leeds United if he does indeed come?
Yeah, of course. He's a very good all-rounder, and I think the only issue in terms of adaptability would be the amount of responsibility he might have at playing at centre half. Because as I mentioned before, he ended the season playing as a sort of a deep-lying midfielder or defensive midfielder. He's a very good passer of the ball. He can control the tempo really well. He's got a very nice long ball too. So I think he finds that position a bit easier to play, at least at this stage in his career. Because although he's 24, it's only, I think, his second full season in the Bundesliga. Previous to that, he was playing in the second tier, then the fourth tier. So he's still relatively inexperienced despite his age, particularly in defence. And he's very versatile, but he hasn't really found a position that he can call his own yet, and he hasn't really found where he wants to be long term. I sort of compare him a bit to Declan Rice, where he has assets to play in defence or in midfield, but isn't quite sure yet which he prefers or which he is more suited to. So I think in terms of adaptability, he'd need a bit of time to learn his craft and maybe find out where he would fit in best in the Leeds team or in a Premier League team. But I think long term, he'd certainly thrive.
And obviously, Tom, being from Get German football news, you must see a lot of German football, Bundesliga 2 football. So in terms of you just talking about his position there, where do you see his position? Because I think that's a really interesting point about the versatility, because we've got Calvin Phillips who can play at the back, he can play in midfield, but I think he's more of an anchor now in defensive midfield, and that's his position. But we didn't know for a while, because sometimes we'd play 3 at the back and then Calvin would revert into a back 3 sometimes. So with Robin, is it sort of, in your opinion, is he sort of a defender or is he a midfielder?
I think eventually he'll be a defender, but at times he can lack a bit of discipline playing there if he hasn't got an experienced player alongside him. I think for the moment in time, he's good in the pair as long as the other person is more of a leader. So I think it'd be great next to somebody like Van Dijk, because he's good at taking taking advice. He's good at being in the right place at the right time, but he isn't perhaps still in that kind of leadership mold yet, or he isn't able to take on too much responsibility yet. So I do think long term, defense is certainly his area, but in terms of learning his game, it's probably not a bad thing for him to be playing in midfield, just because he has the assets to do so. But by the same token, he isn't a sort of a passing maestro. He's not going to ever be a playmaker in the Xavi mold. I think he's given that he's 6'4", he's strong. He reads the game relatively well in terms of interceptions and that kind of thing. I do think his assets are tailored better towards being a defender long term. But there's no harm at the moment in him trying things out and sort of learning his game elsewhere. Similar, I guess, to sort of Joe Gomez playing at right back or left back for Liverpool. I think that's what Freiburg are trying to do. They're trying to get him to become a more rounded player at a time where he can perhaps struggle a little bit when there's that responsibility on him as the last man in defence. And again, because Freiburg, they're a very young team, so you'll often have Robin Koch next to a young centre back as well. And so in a pair like that, someone's got to take responsibility and be the leader and lead the line. And that's where he can struggle a little bit and lose his head slightly. So yeah, I just think he needs a bit of experience around him. But long term, I would say he's definitely more suited to being a centre back.
And what's his, so far, obviously he's had, his season in the Bundesliga. What's his season been like overall?
I think ups and downs, but generally he's been pretty consistent, pretty solid. Like I say, he started the season playing almost exclusively in defence. Later on, he played as kind of an anchor man in midfield. I think that was primarily or chiefly down to Freiburg sort of changing their tactics and trying to be a bit more conservative in their play and just trying to shore things up. I mean, he'd almost drop into like a back 5 at times. But again, I think he's been good. Obviously, with the disruption in Germany, it's been difficult for him to kind of stay consistent with that. But he ended the season pretty well, as Freiburg played well and as they crept closer towards the top 8, and in the end they finished 8th, which is a massive achievement for a club of their size. So as the team played well, he would play well, and towards the end he grabbed a goal and he put in a couple of very influential performances. So generally speaking, I think it was good. I think he can do even better. There were certainly games where he he looked a bit out of his depth in playing in defence. But yeah, overall, I'd say very good, very solid.
And obviously, with regards to Leeds, obviously the main target is Ben White, and as I've mentioned to you off air, the second target is Robin. So, with regards to Bielsa and Robin coming in, do you think that would be sort of the perfect move for him at this point in his career?
I think so, yeah, because it would allow him to get good game time under his belt. It would allow him to play for a manager who has, who has a style of play, and I don't think he'd suit a team where he just has to go in and sort of fulfill a duty as a defender and as a defender alone. I mean, he clearly is going to need to be good with the ball at his feet, which he is. I think that's part of the reason why there probably is a bit of interest in him. The fact that he's very versatile too probably also helps. So I think, yeah, it's massively important that he plays for the right manager and plays for a manager who believes in him and he wants to get the best out of him as a player. There's a lot of links to teams like Benfica and Valencia with Koch. And you just kind of think they're seeing a player with potential and they don't necessarily have a proper purpose for him, or they're not going to, fit him into that team as he should be. Because we've seen a lot of promising young centre-backs who, they show all this talent at a young age, and then the manager thinks, oh, okay, he'll solve all our problems, and they bring him in, and they don't necessarily, he doesn't suit the style, or it just doesn't work out. But I think Bielsa and Leeds would be a perfect club for him right now, because he isn't ready for, European football yet. He isn't ready for that step. He's only had 2 German caps, and those were in friendly games. So he's going to need a bit of time to progress and improve. And I think Leeds would be the perfect place for him to be if he was to come to England.
If he was to come to England, like you just said there, Tom, what A would we expect, and what B are his main strengths?
So I guess main strengths would be he's really good in the air. He doesn't get as many goals as he should in terms of an attacking sense, but he's very dominant aerially. One of the best in the league, I'd say, in terms of he's 6'4", so he can certainly handle himself, but he's not massively tall. But very very assured aerially. It's weird because he reads the game really well and he can make some good interceptions, and at times he can sort of do the opposite of that and step out of a position, and positionally he can be a bit off. But when he does read the game well, he's got a good football brain on him, and he knows how to kind of win the ball back pretty good. Like I say, I think his passing is a big strength of his. Sometimes he can try and hit long balls a bit too often and think he is Van Dijk when he isn't, and that could be a bit of an issue. He's very ambitious in terms of wanting to take ownership and start attacks and that sort of thing. Like I mentioned earlier, I think he's a very good all-rounder. There aren't too many things you can point to and say he's really bad at this, or he hasn't got like one party trick per se. He's just really good at everything. And I think, like I say, in terms of defending, I would certainly point to aerial ability and sort of his distribution as 2 key assets. And again, everything else he's pretty good at and pretty solid at. So there's a really good base of a defender there. It just perhaps needs a bit of fine tuning in terms of positioning, knowing where to be at the right times, and just taking on more responsibility and becoming more assertive. I think that would be the things to work on.
I think naturally as well, the key premise of the Premier League is, as you've said before, is discipline. Obviously, with the influence now of VAR, would that be something that might hinder his just standard play?
I mean, it's something he's used to in Germany. It's something they've been playing with for a season. They've been playing with that for one more season than the Premier League has. So he's definitely used to that. He's not particularly rash. I think one of the good things about him is he hasn't got that sort of young defender hot-headedness where he's diving into every tackle and trying to be a hero. He's certainly ambitious with it when he tries to play forward, but in a defensive sense, he doesn't overcommit. He isn't particularly rash or gung-ho in his defending. He does try to, like I say, be sensible about it. So I don't think it would be too different. Potentially the responsibility and the weight on his shoulders playing for Leeds, their first season back after all these years. Like I say, such a big club. Freiburg has become something of a bit of a cult club in Germany, and they've got a lot of goodwill, but they aren't necessarily a big club. They constantly outpunch teams with bigger budgets, and they're constantly doing better than they should do. And I think that gives the players a degree of freedom. But playing for Leeds with the burden, with the responsibility, if he does have to replace someone like Ben White, that could potentially be a bit of an issue for him short term. But again, I think if he has a manager like Bielsa to kind of guide him, I think he'd be able to suit and adapt really well.
And obviously, you just mentioned it there with regards to Ben White. I mean, he's been integral in everything we've done. 22 clean sheets out of 46 matches, unbelievable performances week in, week out, capped off with a half volley. Well, even I think it was a volley chest outside the box, which I think increased his contract and transfer value by another 10 million, I think. But do you, because naturally I think Leeds are going to go for players with similar attributes, techniques, capabilities. Do you see sort of similarities, as I've just said, with Koch and Ben White?
Yeah, I do. I do. Again, I think it's difficult to kind of gauge who has the more potential and that sort of thing. But I'd put him into the same mold. Obviously, I've seen a lot less of Ben White, but I have seen bits, and I don't think he's quite got the same goal prowess maybe as Ben White after seeing that volley, half volley. But that's something he can work on. I just think he's a very good technical player for a centre half, and in the modern game, you need to be. You know, there's no place anymore for someone who just can hoof it up long field and put it out for a throw. You really have to be an all-rounded player, and I do think he has that. Like I say, that there isn't really an area you look at and say that's a glaring weakness. I think he has that ability. I think he has a similar potential, in my opinion, to Ben White from what I've seen. Because again, although he's 24, he really has a career more akin to a 21 or 22-year-old because of his lack of elite experience. He left Kaiserslautern at a very young age to play in the fourth tier and take it. It's a very common thing in Germany that if you see your path blocked at a big club, that you just go down the levels and you try and find football wherever you can, not on a loan but on like a permanent. And so he's progressively improved. And I think if you see that same kind of improvement level, I think I put him and Ben White as pretty good comparable players. I think in terms of actual a player ability comparison and in terms of attributes, I would compare him more to a Declan Rice or Javi Martinez in that sense of can do a great job in midfield or defence, has got the attributes to do both. So yeah, I think those would be my two obvious comparisons, but there's certainly a bit there in terms of a comparison with Ben White.
It's interesting, Tom, you mentioned that in terms of Ben White, because Ben White has only played in the Championship. Obviously, he's played for Newport County as well, and he's played for Peterborough. Yeah. So we've only seen Ben White play in the lower tiers of English football, whereas Robin has naturally played at the top level, and he's done so consecutively. So you think maybe the transition, would that be maybe a little bit easier for Robin Koch coming into a Leeds side?
You'd like to think so, but again, it really just depends on how he adapts to being at a club of that magnitude and handling the responsibility and potentially also the price tag, because you know his last transfer from Kaiserslautern to Freiburg was I think around 3 million, and so he didn't have all this responsibility. There weren't really many expectations of him because he wasn't really known. But now you're talking about a player who, you know, some of Europe's biggest clubs reportedly want him or did want him at one stage, and whoever he goes to, you'd assume it would be for a relatively big fee, and you'd assume there'd be a lot of expectation because of how highly regarded he is. But I would probably say it would be an easier transition in the sense that he has that elite level experience. It's just for me, it's always a case of, can he go from being a big fish in a small pond to a club like Leeds? And can he still handle himself? Can he keep his head? Can he slowly integrate and not just get a bit too, a bit too flustered by the expectation level? Because I imagine, I'm not a fan of the club, but I imagine, next season there's going to be huge pressure and expectation to deliver and to, for Leeds to not only just get it back in the Premier League but stay there and build something and sustain. So there's going to be a lot of expectation on him. But I would bet him to rise to that because, he's played for the German national team. He knows what it is to have responsibility, to have expectations on his shoulders. So, I think he could handle that relatively well.
And do you think, obviously, this is going to be difficult for you, Tom, but we're going sort of over the odds payment-wise for Ben White, in this current pandemic. I always talk about the sort of the economic crisis that clubs are going through at the minute, and Leeds have actually put £25 million in for Ben White, which is huge in this, in obviously with what's going on with the market at the minute. So would you say that there'd be more value for player quality in going for someone like Robin Koch, who is cheaper, and from what you're saying, will be able to sort of adapt to that Premier League style of play?
Potentially, yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not too sure how much cheaper he would go for. Chiefly because I think there's probably a good chance at some point this summer that somebody from a club from Europe, of Valencia or Benfica, somebody else maybe does drop a cheeky bid in to test the waters, and then there could be something of a price war in terms of or a negotiation battle. So that could drive it up. I think also Freiburg are very good at maximizing the amount they get in for players, because that's their entire model as a transfer club. It's a bit like Southampton. They're going to get the max they can for these players they develop and bring in. It's that Moneyball philosophy, and they're going to want to get the value for him, given his age, given that he's a German international too. I think that's the one thing that people forget sometimes. He has those caps, and while it isn't an England cap, which adds like 5-10 million sometimes, it is nonetheless a sign that he's clearly valued and clearly it has big things ahead. So I'm not really sure. Maybe you know more than I do about how much they'd be willing to pay for him. But
Tom, Tom, just to interrupt there, mate. Sorry, we've not really touched on, and you just touched it a little bit there, and it's criminal not to. But he got the German caps. Now, how did he fare in that German national team? What was the sort of publicity and press of it, of his entrance into the team like over there? Did he do well?
He did. Yeah, he did relatively well. It's a sign really of how well regarded he is, because there's quite a few young German centre backs coming through the ranks now and playing at under 21 level and so forth. So yeah, there was quite a lot of press attention, because for him to get a cap ahead of some of the other players in the league at the minute was seen as a really good sign that he's on the right path and on the right trajectory. Again, from what I recall, the games, they were just friendly games, and it was games that Germany won relatively easily. But he looked composed. He looked like he belonged there. He's played many times for the under-21 German team, which has had so much success in recent years. So he's accustomed to playing at that level. And again, I think part of the hype in terms of around Europe came from the fact that he did play. He did play for the national team, and all of a sudden people were looking at him and go, "Oh, okay, he must be good. He must be well regarded in Germany because he's playing for the national team." And so, yeah, I think that certainly changed the perception of him. He wasn't now just a promising player who had a bit of talent. He was now somebody who was a certified prospect, and I think that's kind of added to the allure of him, really, in terms of foreign interest. Because it's interesting that within Germany itself, I think the only interested club has been Leipzig, but outside around Europe, there's been a lot of interest from Italy and from Portugal and from Spain, obviously, and England too. So, yeah, I think that played a massive role in terms of enhancing his reputation and making people think that this really is a player we need to keep an eye on.
And does he? How recently has he been involved in the German team? And is he still one of the players that the German sort of backroom staff are looking at?
Yeah, it was last season, and I think he was drafted in just after qualification was guaranteed, and there was a series of friendlies, and so I think long term that I think what it is with Germany now is they're in a really big rebuilding phase where they're transitioning from, I'm not sure if you're aware, but like Thomas Müller and a group of players, Jerome Boateng, they were all basically told you've got no future anymore, and so what the German system is doing is trying to identify who are going to be the players, going forward. And I think there's a real emphasis to just try players out, to bring them in, to see how they react, to see how they cope. And I think Koch is one of the players who. Oops, sorry about that.
It's all right.
Sorry. I think Koch is one of the players who they look at and they see, okay, well, this is one of 4 or 5 who potentially could come in and could be the new face of the team. They've got guys like Süle in there. They've got a couple of other young defenders too. But I think that there's every aspiration to try and keep him in, at least peripherally. He might not always play, but I think he'll always be in and around the squad if he continues to play as he has done. So again, I think that there's absolutely an aspiration there to keep him in the system, because clearly they see something that they like in him as a player. And he fits in with the system well, with the passing. He's good at distribution. He can get it up forward quickly for somebody like Timo Werner. to play on the shoulder of the last defender. So he fits the ethos of the team really well. And I imagine when internationals finally do resume, if he isn't in the squad, he won't miss out by much because they clearly regard him very well.
And there's been natural rumours with Leeds because our passing style of football, our sort of intensity, that there's been a lot of names picked out from the Premier League in terms of players like John Stones. It's just a case study example. Do you think that Robin is sort of someone who would be a better acquisition if we miss out on Ben White and he's going up against those other alternatives? Do you think Robin would be better than someone per se, John Stones?
I think so, primarily just because you're investing in the future and you're investing in a player who you think is going to improve. I mean, I think if you were buying Robin for the player he is today, it's a gamble. But the assumption is this is a guy who, with each year, has improved exponentially. And I think, in terms of Stones, it's a really interesting one because there's some who say, no, he needs time, needs patience. And there's some people who say, well, this is his ceiling. This is all he's going to ever be. And so in that sense, I think while Robin is a risk, he's a relatively low cost risk. He's somebody who quite possibly could be a talent who goes on to be one of the elite defenders in the world. I mean, if he fulfills all the potential he has, like I say, there isn't really a chink in the armor there. He's got everything on paper to be an elite performer. So I think it would be a risk, but a calculated risk in the sense of you're buying into the future and into the player you think you can develop him into, particularly if there's a leadership group there who he can learn off, if there's players he can learn off, if he can, rustle up a good partnership with another centre-half. I just think there's so much there that he could be, that it's worth taking the gamble on it, particularly if you can get him for, 5-10 million less than for John Stones or Ben White.
Yeah, and it's really what I liked about what you were mentioning there is obviously our captain, Liam Cooper, who's been at the club now since I think 2014, Leeds lad, yep. Leeds fan. He is sort of coming up, and Ben White sort of was coming into the fore last year, and we were playing Bristol City away, and apparently Cooper was saying that he was a little bit nervous at the start, and Cooper sort of brought him down to the level and was like, look, you're playing for Leeds now, just look at me, we will be fine, we'll get through this together. And it seems like, obviously, when you're talking about Robin there, he's had maybe a bit of an inexperience at the back, maybe a bit of inconsistency. Would sort of a leader at the back alongside him improve his game drastically?
Absolutely, or in my opinion, it would. It would just give him somebody to learn off. It would give him a bit more confidence too, that he doesn't have to be the man to lead the back line. He doesn't have to be the one to take the responsibility all the time. I just think it would be crucial to him because, like I say, too often big clubs will go out, buy a young, promising centre-back and just throw him into the deep end with nobody around him to necessarily guide him and just sort of say sink or swim. And if he has somebody there next to him who he can learn off, who he can take advice from, who can just kind of tell him where to be in the right places and everything. Because, like I say, if he can be the same kind of player he is in Germany, where he's aerially dominant, his passing is good, his interceptions are good, the only thing really missing is that positional awareness sometimes and knowing where to be at the right time, keeping his head in pressurized moments and knowing when to step out and when to step back. I think if he could add that to his game, yeah, you're talking about a brilliantly rounded defender. And again, you need that. I mean, I really don't think that, sort of young defenders such as Joe Gomez would be half the player they were if they didn't have someone like Van Dijk next to him and somebody who can just be the one to take that responsibility. And when things go badly, they're the one who kind of will stick their neck out and say, no, I'm taking that on the chin. He's got to learn his game. And again, I just think 24, it's not necessarily too old for a defender, and even less so when it's a defender who has such little, elite league experience. And so, yeah, I can't guarantee that he'd come in and be a regular starter week in, week out, particularly at centre back, particularly that he'll be in the Premier League as well. But if he can come in, learn from guys like Cooper, learn his trade, add bits to his game, I think that would be the perfect environment for him to learn and grow, particularly with Bielsa as a manager too, because he's got the perfect group there to learn from and learn his trade from. And yeah, I just think that would be ideal rather than maybe making a step up to a Benfica or a Valencia and not really having an idea of how you want to use him and not really having anyone for him to learn off. So on paper, I think it would work out brilliantly. Yeah.
So, Tom, just to finally end on, mate, you were talking about it being a little bit of a gamble at the start, but overall, if we didn't get Ben White, you believe sort of Robin Koch will be a player to go in for?
Yeah, I think so. Like I say, it represents a risk, but a calculated one, simply because the price isn't going to be extortionate. He's a player who has proven his credentials at international level. Again, it's a big step up in terms of responsibility, in terms of going from a club like Freiburg to a club like Leeds. The expectation would be big, but yeah, for me, it's a risk absolutely worth taking, and it will be a steal because there's a lot of clubs who want him right now. And so I think for Leeds, it would represent a big coup and a big statement too, to get a player who a couple of months ago was being linked with the likes of United, with the likes of Spurs. So yeah, for me, it makes perfect sense.
Right, brilliant. Well, Tom, it's been absolutely amazing, mate. Get German football news, guys. Make sure you subscribe. I'll have all Tom's links in the description below. Tom, thank you so much. And it's a bit more positive now, because if we don't get Ben White, we know that someone like Robin could be that next prodigy, hopefully under Bielsa. So thank you, mate, and yeah, I'll speak to you soon.